How do you deal with an overly friendly neighbor who asks too many questions about your life when you happen to be outdoors at the same time? I live in an extremely religious community, Mormons, so this happens all the time. I used to try to be vague and give hints, but the best technique I have found is this one. I am kind of a private person. Double quote. And then I compliment them on something I have noticed. Nice grass or hey thanks for checking on me. I know it comes from a good place. Double quote. Oh Mormons. You gotta love them. I live in Utah, so I can relate. Difference is that once they found out we weren't Mormon, we pretty much turned invisible. Edit. Just felt like I should add a bit more since this comment is gaining traction. Utah is kind of a strange place. And Utah Mormons are not like other Mormons. Everything in the whole state was built and run by Mormons. The whole state has this sense of community. Everything is connected. Outsiders are not welcome. They are just outsiders. It's hard to put it to words. But it's not hostile. It's just that once they figured out you are not part of this massive interconnected group, then they move on. Someone else mentioned people coming around to ask about wards, and it is spot on. I also want to add that my parents' neighbors are very friendly and have always gotten along with them. Edit 2. Just wanna give a shout out to all y'all Utahns in here. And a very big shout out to any of y'all from Ogden. Utah is silly, but it's home. Look, honestly, I have very poor social awareness and no filter at all, so they would probably hear about how my chronic illnesses have resulted in constipation so bad that I have to be on laxatives for 6 months to restart my bowels, and the consequences that all of this has on my SX life. I fully accept that I am the reason that I have very few friends. You should move to Germany. This is totally normal there. If you ask someone how are you, they will tell you medically how they are. Took me a bit to get used to when I lived there. The flip side is that the average German can't understand why you would ask someone how they are without expecting an answer. In North America we say how are you when we mean hi. Germans don't do that. I really liked living there. I truly like having some small conversations with my neighbors and wish more would partake. Just make sure you aren't approaching the same neighbor every single time you see them outside. I no longer have a good relationship with one of my neighbors because every single solitary time I was outside, her boyfriend insisted on coming to the fence and talking to me. I finally had to ask him to come by more sparingly. And he took that as no one in your household should ever dare speak to me again. Sometimes I just want to enjoy the sunshine and silence on my patio. It's not a dig at anyone. I just want to be alone, damn it. Try having a neighbor who tracks when you leave and arrive back home. Talks to your boss about your work schedule and when you're actually supposed to be at home. Asking my boss if I had COVID when she noticed I hadn't left the house in a couple days. The list goes on and on. I f***ing hate nosy neighbors. Is your life really that miserable you have to worry about strangers? I told her off and we are currently looking to move. Some people are just bad neighbors. Some of the responses you've gotten don't seem to understand that there are just people like this that don't respect personal boundaries and can't pick up on subtle hints like one-word answers. The way I deal with these people is by humoring them for a bit. Using some of the tactics already mentioned, giving short, uninterested answers. If they don't catch the hints I'm dropping, I'll pretend to have something else to do. Go inside. The premise of this question is why the phrase good fences make good neighbors exists. Try to make your boundaries clear. And, barring that, build a tall fence so they can't bother you. I made friends with my neighbor at the beginning of lockdown. Now whenever I go out front of my house, he comes out. Every single time. Even when we just open our front door, he comes out and just sits. One time, Amazon dropped a package off when I was working on the side of the house. He opened his window, proceeded to yell to me that Amazon had delivered a package. I don't go out of the front door anymore. Unless going to my car. I just hang out around back and even take my dogs on walks leaving through and arriving through the backyard. I think maybe they're not so much intrusive, just trying to spark a conversation. I would stop what you're doing Give them 5 minutes of undivided attention. You don't have to reveal too much. Just get to know each other. Then wrap it up with an alright, good to see you. I gotta get back to this. I had a retired neighbor that talked more than I liked, so early on I avoided yard work. etc if he was out. I'm not much for too much useless chit chat. He was a very nice guy though and helpful, so overall I wanted to stay on his good side and didn't want to think I was being short. So I started talking to him at great length about things I wanted to talk about. Sometimes I would talk for an hour or two until he got bored and went inside. This took a few sessions, but eventually he started avoiding extended conversation with me for the most part because he knew it would derail his activities. Worked out well and we had a great neighborly relationship until he moved. YMMV. Ask him about their life. The same way they do. Edit. Okay, look, what I meant to say is bother them as much as they do to you. So then they'll see that and then stop. Or they either spend so much time talking about themselves that you don't even have to share anything personal. Vague answers to stay friendly. Like if they say, what do you do for a living? You say this and that. How do you take care of your lawn? I do basic things to it. Any tips? And just look serious and stare them on whilst reversing the questions to them. My partner and I just moved into a house and got cornered by a neighbor for 30 minutes. My Midwest sense of guilt needs to clarify a few things. We were on our way to do stuff. This neighbor started talking and didn't stop for 30 minutes. I'm not exaggerating. Half an hour. Non-stop talking at us. Not with us. We tried every little polite out we could take. Plenty of well, s and damn. That's crazy s and even a few goddamn well, we should really get going s. I even started leading the conversation into the middle of the street hoping a passing car would separate us. None if it worked. We only finally made it out of there because it got dark. I've decided the next time this happens I'm just going to tell her politely, but firmly, that I need to take a dump and then just walk away. Edit. The replies to this are hilarious. I tried every single one of these things. I have no explanation why it took so long to finally end the convo. Be as polite as possible. Seriously. It's better than having a bad one who you are constantly at odds with. This. I lived in a house that was divided into 5 apartments. On the bottom floor. The neighbor next to me, I had great talks with all the time. He seemed to ask some semi-personal questions sometimes, but I was always polite. Then some people moved in upstairs. They woke me up their first night there at 5 AM by screaming at each other. So after about 15 minutes of this, I went outside and shouted at them to shut the FCK up and they just screamed back at me. So from then on, these people would go out of their way to make my life hard. Meanwhile my other neighbor had just become good company. I have a neighbor who I legitimately hide from because I hate talking to her. She'll keep you outside for like half an hour. I'll duck behind the dumpster and wait for her door to close. I have a dog who is scared of PPL, so if I have her outside it's easy to be like, OHH, sorry, my dog is dragging me away. I know I'm an asshole, but I hate people. I have zero interest in their lives. My favorite neighbors are ones who never ever talk to me. I don't mind overly friendly neighbors as much. Giving a short vague answer to certain questions you're not comfortable with is probably best. The problem I have currently with a new neighbor is that they are not respectful of other space or property. They have over 7 adults and 5 minors living in the house. Cars parked in front of my home. RVs. Old scrap car in their driveway. City violation. They let their kids run all around my driveway. Play with my doorbell. Throw rotten fruit in my backyard. One of the adult men likes to leave his trash in front of my driveway. Constantly yells at night. Power washes all of his cars and RVs close to my driveway, all day. Several neighbors I have spoken to have had nothing but negative things to say about them. But no one does anything about it. I try to actively ignore people like this, as they are renting the home and I have no idea how long for. But my patience is running thin. Wear headphones when you go outside. Or pretend to be on the phone. I always pretend to talk on the phone. Sometimes I actually call one of my parents just to make it more legit. My downstairs neighbor is a nightmare. Every time I walked out he'd come out just to talk, and I've tried telling him I need to get to work but it didn't help. He would come up to my balcony, knock on the door hard about 10 times, and when I wouldn't answer, I never do unless I'm expecting someone, miss me with that murder shit. He tried looking through my windows. Luckily I have curtains, but when it happens multiple times a week at 10 o'clock at night and you live alone, it gets nerve-wracking. I told my landlord about it, so it stopped for a few months now, and luckily COVID is keeping everyone at bay, but still, he's a creep. End every sentence with the words "as was foretold in the prophecy." I don't know if that'll help with your neighbor specifically. It's more a sort of general life tip. Holy Christ, I burst out loud laughing at this one. 3 months ago the weight of my truck collapsed onto my knee, and the next day the neighbors were checking up on me wondering what happened, and I can't even imagine saying the truck's weight slammed my leg as was foretold in the prophecy. Be nice and endure the polite small talk like adults do. Sometimes you can choose not to be a socially inept asshole. It's your neighbor, not a stranger. Being on good terms is beneficial, and maybe you could even make the neighbor's day. In my particular situation I am enduring it and being polite as possible, but he's outside all day and almost always drunk. Anytime I go out to my car it's a race to get in and out before him and his drunk friends notice me. They run a detail shop out of their house and are basically partying and yelling all day. My advice to you is know the full situation before calling someone a socially inept asshole. I've learned this lesson a very hard way. I've known my neighbor, 56M, for around 15 years and considered him a family friend. He watched me grow up and our families have even taken a vacation together. He was always nosy and asked personal questions, but I shrugged it off as that's just how he is. That was until my girlfriend, 20F, moved in with us. He slowly became more and more friendly with her, asking her where she works, about her family, and slowly changing his personality to hers. I suspected something was going on. Keep in mind he is married with a daughter still in high school. One day I came home from work and my girlfriend was sharing a beer and talk with him in his garage. Nothing out of the normal. He frequently invited us over for beers and whatnot, so I thought nothing of it. A few days later my girlfriend comes to me in tears. And not of sadness but of frightened tears. After what seemed like forever she told me that the night she had a beer with him he told her horrible things. That he wanted to FCK her brains out and steal her and tie her up. He's thought about breaking into our home and taking advantage of her. He as well broke into her car and was leaving her love notes. My once friendly neighbor went crazy. I confronted him about the situation and he admitted to it and told me I was no good and did not deserve her. And keep in mind he told me this in his backyard with his wife and daughter home. Fast forward a month later. In this time he hasn't showed his face since. My girlfriend gets off work early and as she is walking into our house he was hiding in the bushes asking if she was afraid of him. She ran inside and we had to call the police. And for the next 2 months he sat on his property line next to ours with a small foldable chair and just watched our house. So the best way to deal with an overly nosy neighbor is to cut the convo short and walk away. I say something like, "Oh, I don't want to get into that. But have you heard about so and so?" Or if I really don't want to talk at all, I'll say that I'm not feeling too well and we'll catch up another time. Then if this happens again, I'll pretend to take a phone call. After a while, hopefully they get the hint, and if not, then I guess I would just have to move. Semicolon. Close bracket. One of the best responses I've seen. Just basic redirection. Works magically on toddlers and most adults who aren't persistent. How they respond to that will also dictate your future relationship as well if they persist. You'll know one of a few things. 1. They have poor social skills. 2. They are persistently nosy. 3. They have ill intent. 4. How they handle not getting their way for the smallest things. Just be an adult and say you don't really want to talk. Sometimes just being direct is best. I think it's not a superb way to reply as you don't want to get involved in a strained relationship with your next door neighbors, since some people will see it as a rude manifestation when you are engaging in a conversation. I suppose that you'd better say it rhetorically or give a hint that they shouldn't ask some types of questions that you don't want to give your answers to rather than being over direct. If it works then you'll sense that. But in case if it doesn't, just do your things and ignore them for a while. Put your finger up to your mouth and say SHHHH. The aliens are listening. Then point to any scar on your body and say this is where they inserted the chip. Ask to borrow money. This works unless they're in the mob, in which case they would love to loan you some money. Grey rock. Keep your answers short, simple, and vague. Examples. What did you do this weekend? EHH not much. Double quote. The conversation will eventually fizzle out, they'll get the hint. Moved in and added a flagpole to my front yard. Nosy neighbor comes over. Gonna hoist Old Glory up there, right? Nice. Double quote. I said no. I like to fly flags of the countries I've been to. I get a flag from each one as a reminder of my trip. A few sports teams and other ones too. Everyone flies the US flag and while I like it, I find it boring. Double quote. She said well I'm sure you'll have a Trump flag up till November at least. Double quote. I said no. That would be the very last flag I would ever fly, I assure you. Double quote. She had no response and has not come back. They are, however, installing their own flagpole now. I moved. It was to the point she had binoculars out watching us. I have anxiety and can't do anything if someone watches me. I love woodwork and working on cars. I could do neither without her sitting on her porch and watching me. My yard wasn't big enough to build a garage, so I had to work outside. She would catch you outside and talk for 30 minutes. Plus side. We made a buttload of cash off the house sale. Moving to a house with 2 garages and only one neighbor. A couple hundred yards away. I hold up my index finger for a second and then pull my cell phone from my pocket and pretend I have a call. I mouth, "It's my boss," to my neighbor and launch into a series of ahas and got it's into the phone as I slowly wander back into my house or to my car. Works every time. Headphones in. Sunglasses on. I have a nosy neighbor. I set boundaries. Then I used this technique. He finally understood that I didn't want to be bothered. Now he doesn't bother me unless absolutely necessary. I usually go with making them uncomfortable. My mom's cousin asked when me and my wife are going to have kids. So I said I didn't know you thought so much about me, have sex, and he never asked again. You ever been in a storm? Wally? I mean, a real storm? Not a thunderstorm, but a storm of fists raining down on your head. Blasting you in the face. Pummeling you in the stomach. Hitting you in the chest so hard you think your heart's gonna stop. You ever been in a storm like that? Wally? I mean, a real storm? Not a thunderstorm, but a storm of fists raining down on your head. Blasting you in the face. Pummeling you in the stomach. Hitting you in the chest so hard you think your heart's gonna stop. You ever been in a storm like that? Lie and make up super crazy shit. Remember when Tony Soprano had his dipshit neighbor hold a bag of rocks telling him it was something very important and he needed him to hold on to it for him for a while? Here are some tips from 150% Introvert 1. Don't go into much details 2. Speak monotonously and without any interest 3. Don't look him in the eyes. Better at the phone 4. Never ask him and you, HBU, and etc, and that's it. Give it some time and he won't give a FCK about you. I have such a neighbor and I simply state, that's not a subject I wish to discuss. Double quote.